Good morning, everyone, and welcome to World FinTech Festival India 2021. The digital push, which has resulted in strong digital adoption among consumers and SMEs as well in India, has emerged as a preferred choice for fintechs across the world. In comparison to the rest of the world, India's fintech industry is the fastest expanding. Over 67% of the 2,400 plus fintechs in India today were founded in the last 5 years. Now, the Indian fintech sector is presently worth somewhere around 31 billion US dollars and is predicted to expand to 150 plus US billion dollars by 2025. The value of fintech transactions is expected to rise from 66 billion US dollars in 2019 to 138 billion US dollars by 2023. Now, payments, lending, wealth tech, technology, personal finance management, insurance technology, regulation technology, cryptocurrency and cybersecurity, as well as bank tech and the other subsegments comprising the Indian fintech ecosystem are pivotal to the growth of Indian fintech market. The World FinTech Festival India aims to deliver the conversations woven around the facts that I've just mentioned just above, and a lot more than that. So without any further delay, let us all jump into this ocean of knowledge on fintechs in India and the world. And our first session today is a fireside chat on driving digital inclusion in India. And joining us for this discussion are Mr. Nikhil Sahni, Division President, South Asia from Mastercard, who will also moderate this session. And joining Nikhil on this session is Anubrata Biswas, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Airtel Payments Bank. So let's watch this fireside chat on driving digital inclusion in India.
Hi, everybody. I would like to thank Singapore FinTech Festival and the Monetary Authority of Singapore for being persistent in their efforts to bring together this wonderful event to all of us. Thank you so much. And would also like to thank Anubrata Biswas, MD and CEO of Airtel Payments Bank, for taking his time out today to share his thoughts on such a pressing topic. We'll get into that, very, very soon. Coincidentally, just for the record, our relationship goes back, to our days at IIM Ahmedabad, where we are together. So, I'll, of course, welcoming Anubrata here and look forward to an interactive discussion. But before we, start off, just to, set the context, it is a little startling to note that a large population out of the overall Indian setup, even with internet access, is not fairly well acquainted with simple digital skills like online searches, which is a fairly simple skill, but people are still not well versed with that. Furthermore, digital adoption for everyday function by corporates, schools, universities, MSMEs, startups, farmers, government offices, and others have pronounced the need for a digital savvy population. As the world increasingly move towards digital, we as India need to bridge the gap to ensure that the power of digital technologies is unleashed to benefit all citizens equally, to break the digital divide that the government has also been talking about all this while. So of course, digitization in India is no longer by any stretch of imagination a luxury. Be it paying at a kirana store through a POS machine or filing taxes online, New India is adapting very, very rapidly to a digital lifestyle at a very, very rapid pace. The country currently has nearly 45% of its population online, which is a fairly strong number. This is also reflected in over half of the country's population being online. The 53.9 ratings that were recently released by the Reserve Bank of India's Financial Inclusion Index. This large-scale digital onboarding has naturally put increased focus on digital literacy, as India truly moves into digital financial inclusion, which is where we possibly have the best in the business, the expert, which is Anubrata, to give us a sense of what is it that the way forward could be. So Anubrata, maybe I'll therefore get into my first question that at least I had for you, which is that Airtel Payments Bank has always been a very big supporter of financial inclusion in India. You've been collaborating with several fintechs, regulators, NGOs, and policymakers to create a safe, secure, and seamless payment ecosystem. So let's start by asking you about your current business model and learnings from the initiatives that you are undertaking to enable digital inclusion. Yours is possibly the only successful business model that one has come across payment banks in India. So over to you, Anubrata. You're on mute.
Thanks, Nikhil. Thanks for having me here. I'd like to thank Mastercard for inviting me, and of course, the Singapore FinTech Forum and the Monetary Authority of Singapore for sort of making this ecosystem happen. It's a very vital dialogue, and I'm delighted to be here. Let me start off by talking a little bit about the bank in itself. We are operating in a very large space, but with a fairly unique proposition. We are India's only hyperlocal fintech operating across all payment segments in the market with scale. So we have a banking license. We operate in a digital payments business for a highly evolved consumer set, which we call the Indian consumer. And we also have what we call digital inclusion and financial inclusion offerings for a large variety of financially non-included consumers, whom we call in an euphemism, Bharat. And of course, we have a very strong B2B play as well. Aggregate, the bank is at scale today. We have 60 million users. We have over 100 million consumers onboarded with us, and we have 32 million consumers who transact with us on a monthly basis. What are these payments all about? If you really look at India in a slightly deep way, India can be split into what we call two segments of individuals linked to each other with a flow of cash. So you have the urban consumer segment who's very familiar with digital payments, who is driving the huge adoption of digital payments today. And you've got a large set of financially non-included consumers who are coming swiftly onto digital payments for the first time. Let me paint the size of this problem in numbers so that we have a clearer sense. First, on the urban side, you've got give or take around 150 to 200 million people who are regularly using digital payments. On the financially non-included consumer side, you've got roughly 350 to 400 million people who are really present in rural India. A significant part of them will start digital payments for the first time over the next couple of years. So you've got, if you paint this picture, around a 500 to 600 million consumer opportunity. Interestingly, out of the 600 million people, only 200 million people use digital payments regularly on a monthly basis. That means that you've got a 350 to 400 million opportunity in India, which will unfold over the next 3 to 4 years. The second big point to note is the point which you mentioned, which was that 45% of India's consumers are online. If you really reverse this and look at it from the method of access, actually India's smartphone penetration today is roughly 550 million. Yeah. Now, if you subtract the digital payment users, which is 200 million, you've got a 350 million opportunity of people who are online using their phones, but people who are not using digital payments. And that's really the business case for the bank. And that's really the business case for India to really sharply drive digital adoption in the world. Interestingly, this set of 300 to 50 million people has only been increasing, which means that smartphone penetration has actually been growing at a faster rate than digital payments. Linked to this, two consumer sets is the fact that India is still a 14% cash economy, like cash in circulation is 14% of GDP. And the velocity of cash actually monthly hasn't changed too much. It's still around 6 times. If you multiply 14 and 6, you've got 84, 85%. which means India is still 84 to 85% cash economy. All of this put together means that India is really poised for significant digital payment explosion. In fact, what has happened over the last, I would say, couple of years with the advent of UPI is still under-indexed in terms of what the potential of India is. Easily, if you look at depth and width, depth in terms of consumers using more digital payments, and width, which is consumers and more consumers starting to use digital payments, you've got an easy 10 to 50x explosion possible in digital payments.
That's I think from a context setting perspective and the opportunity size, I think, which is unmatched across the globe. And, something which has, of course, as you said, with the advent of what has happened with UPI, we talked about a fairly significant number in the last month that came in. But according to you, what could be, Anubrata, on to take the discussion a little forward on this entire 350 million opportunity, and which will potentially grow in a country like India, it will keep growing every year. So what could be some of the key strategic pillars? Because, to bring financial inclusion in a mixed economy like India, given the fact and the mix that you talked about, the two separate segments, and the needs for, kind of getting financial inclusion in, what according to you will be your process to bring a method to this entire setup?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nikhil. And I must point out that, off the table, of course, Mastercard and we collaborate very deeply to think through solutions for this. But let's start with a very simple problem and ask ourselves what, for the consumer in the first instance, is a digital transaction. And there, if we take a walk back history, you have a very, very interesting dynamic of the market of India, which is not true for any other place in the world. It's the fact that the telecom market in India is broadly prepaid, which means that consumers purchase talk time and minutes before they actually use it on their phones. To put this in context, 95% of India's telecom market is a prepaid market, unlike any other market in the world. So now let's walk through what this means. It basically means, given India's mobile phone penetration and India's rapid growth of mobile usage over the last 15 years, driven of course by companies such as Airtel, almost everybody in India uses the mobile phone. It's been part of the smartphone and the phone revolution. And broadly, 750 million people every month do a mobile phone recharge. And this, Nikhil, is what is the real context for Airtel Payments Bank to convert people from a feature phone or smartphone recharge transaction to digital payments. So let's put this in a business model. You've got 750 million people doing a recharge for the first time. We've been able to, through Airtel, which is a third of the market, move up a significant proportion of these consumers online. So for Airtel today, through Airtel Payments Bank, half of all recharges are done digitally through the app. And this is the starting point. Airtel Payments Bank has a clearly integrated online and offline play, where we are able to accept digital payments through a very integrated play on the telecom app, which offers a set of banking and payment solutions embedded in a person for the first time trying to do a mobile recharge, and a very wide network of banking points which are able to accept and give out cash. In fact, Nikhil, these banking points today, we run 315,000 monthly active banking points, which is actually the largest banking network in the world. So for India, with this very large consumer segments who are diverse, you need this integrated online and offline play to be able to move people gently towards digital payments for the first time. And there we have two businesses of ours. One is a mobile banking business, where we are able to seamlessly onboard digital payment users. And second, we have a very large offline banking point network where we are able to offer banking transactions and cash payment services. And these two work in tandem, and therefore we are able to get a large number of users onboarded. And as I mentioned, that number of users today is over 30 million.
Oh, that was, I think the way you stitched it together, takes me back to our IMA days, for the benefit of everyone else, who's listening to us. Anubrata always used to be very good at this, and I'm actually quite amazed to see that he's only got better at it. It's been more than 20 years in terms of articulating the entire strategy. So wonderful, but Anubrata, let's move a little bit more towards, from the digital inclusion side. And of course, we just through a festive season, thankfully, after the advent of the pandemic, the season, though, when you see the number of people that you end up checking out in major markets in the city of Delhi, it's a little scary to see so many people around. But fundamentally, I think the amount of payments and the entire mechanism on the festive season has really kind of taken an upliftment, and there's been crazy amounts of payments that have gone digital to the point that you made earlier. But this has also led to another issue, which is a significant thing, which we at Mastercard are actually kind of working very deeply on, is the cyber side and the intelligence side on cyber. So, what sort of solutions have you guys come up with? Because we have our sets of solutions, and I know we collaborate very closely on some of these cyber and intelligence solutions. But any views that you want to give on that part?
Yeah, look, now our big insight, and of course, like fundamentally converting people into some different behavior has to be proposition based, right? And now we are, I think, segueing the conversation into this urban digital space and what can we do to drive payments more. Interestingly, 57% of all tier 1 plus users in the country believe that they have hesitation in using digital payments because they're afraid of their accounts being taken over by fraudsters. This was an incredible insight we hit upon during COVID. And this is actually one big disabler for India's 10x growth in payments. We work, Nikhil, as you know, very closely with Mastercard at the back end to evolve fraud-linked solutions. But we came up with one killer solution, which I want to talk about, which is today at scale. We, along with Airtel, were able to collaborate and do a world-first telecom and banking proposition, which involved a third layer of authentication being passed on onto the consumer's phone for authentication with a yes/no message before a consumer transaction actually got his account debited. We call this SafePay. It was an Airtel first product. It was a world first product. No other country in the world has had a partnership with a telecom company and a bank to come up with a third layer of authentication, which is so seamless, which involves a person's phone. Mind you, it is not using an app. It uses the consumer's SIM card, and therefore the authentication message comes on top of the phone and not as an in-app notification. So the consumer is forced to accept it or decline it. Today, we've got over 500,000 consumers who use it daily on top of our digital banking proposition, where we are offering a seamless banking proposition on top of payments, where we call ourselves India's fastest growing neobank with over 2 million consumers who have adopted us for a safe, value-adding and convenient banking proposition, different from other banks who are fundamentally branch and mobile driven. Here, consumers adopt us because they want a secondary bank account where they want to do digital transactions in. They feel safe and secure about it because of Airtel SafePay. And we are seeing very widespread adoption. We acquire close to 1 million consumers now a month across all our channels on the bank account.
That's awesome, and fundamentally we've worked together on some of these items. But I think what you guys have done, it's an industry first, and it's something which will give the consumer a little bit of, it relaxes the consumer that you have something. And I've actually also seen some of the way you guys have advertised this feature. I think it's also done in a very unique format. So congratulations on that as well. It's kind of the entire subject has come out really well. But kind of just about again, in terms of the challenges that you feel we would need to mitigate to build a let's say a digitally inclusive community, what would be one or two points that you'd have on that before we maybe change track and look at some other aspects?
I think, Nikhil, it would be good to probably speak about the collaborations we are doing, right? And I'll throw the baton back to you after making a couple of comments. Somewhere we will need to now, instead of looking at the horizontal, which is the consumer and offering him digital payments, also look at the verticals and figure out in India's value chains, how much more can we digitize so that cash at the last mile reduces, or at least reduces in velocity. Let me give you an example of what I mean. If you look at India's top 4 value chains, which is agriculture products, fertilizer, milk, etc., they account for, give or take, around 15% of India's GDP. And that entire chain still today is almost wholly in cash, which actually broadly is a significant inhibitor towards further digitization. Therefore, while one looks at consumer propositions and offerings, simplification of a mobile banking offering, for example, ease of onboarding using influencers in local communities so that people start using it better, there also needs to be what I call value chain digitization at source, involving digitizing the milk supplies, digitizing agriculture, digitizing how procurement is done, digitizing how loans are made. And this is where we have done some very interesting pilots. And we are starting, of course, Nikhil, with the pilot which Mastercard and we are working through, which is the farmer procurement solution which we are working, which you may want to talk about.
Oh, thanks. I think Anubrata, really apt for us to kind of be discussing that. So fundamentally, the way we look at agriculture, and if you look at agriculture as a business, it's predicated on largely 3 pillars. One is information, the second is logistics, and the third is payments. That is what covers the entire agri chain. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to create an ecosystem wherein each and every component of farming, whether it's procurement, whether it's harvest, whether it is the information connected with weather, with how exactly the monsoons are going to be, or it is credit on the other side, or else fundamentally logistics. So you talked about dairy, and I will have another question for you on that, and maybe take you back to our IMA days also, talk about a case study that we were introduced to those days. But fundamentally the idea is, I think, agri, and I'm fully with you, the 150 million farmers, digitization levels at 3 to 4% at best, large cash economy, which can be kind of substantially digitized. But our approach to that was an ecosystem model, that you create an entire ecosystem comprising of each and every component, which is maybe, as I said, the FPOs, which are the farmer producing organizations, the large suppliers, large entities such as agtechs that have started to come in, get the credit chain moving. So create a full ecosystem and look at this, because this, from an overall kind of payment size perspective, is a very, very large piece that one could take through. So because you gave the dairy example, and if you remember our Kamadhenu dairy days, which was amongst the first case studies that we did, I have, so we've obviously known about this, but I want you to just talk about how you kind of got the digital financial solutions to dairy farmers, and then also about expanding financial services to over nearly 1,700 unbanked villages in Chhattisgarh. Now, that's something which I was very fascinated by when you told me about it. So if you could just take a couple of minutes to at least let people know about that, I think that'll be very interesting.
But I have to candidly admit, I've completely forgotten that case study. This brings back a lot of memories. None of them, I would say, fairly crystal clear. But let me, Nikhil, take a segue and tell you a little bit about what you're doing in the underbanked space. Today, Airtel Payments Bank, as I mentioned, is operating 315,000 monthly banking points. Roughly 60% of them are in tier 5 and tier 6. And for the benefits of the participants who might not be familiar, essentially tier 5 and tier 6 are deep rural villages with very remote access to banking. The average distance of a branch from those villages would be 11 to 12 kilometers. Today, we bank 1 in 6 villages in the country. And we've scaled that up slowly and steadily by partnerships with, as an example, dairy companies, which you sort of mentioned. I'll mention one company, possibly not in Jharkhand, but based out of Bangalore, called Stellapps, which has a very innovative method towards procuring, where they've been able to digitize the entire procurement chain, completely electronic weighing and operating processes with a physical person who is the person at source managing, discussing, and colluding with farmers. Now, what we did was we converted this person who is the representative of the dairy farm or the dairy chain towards also being a business correspondent of the bank and his location to be a banking point, which means that in one shot, he not only becomes a dairy procurer, but he also becomes a banking service provider in that local village. And this change, along with, of course, solving for the problem of him having to have cash, which we solved through a very unique 2-tier process in the country, means that we are able to solve the dairy problem in a much more significant way than many other players who've tried to do this earlier. So if I were to simplify learnings from that, it would be only 3. First, use the dairy procurer or the dairy farmer himself to become a banking service provider. Second, solve for the problem of cash so that at least we are able to do a digital first transaction, but with an option to take out cash at source. And third, to do this at scale so that a state or a set of districts is able to roll out the pilot simultaneously. We are quite bullish about this being the next level of evolution. As you very rightly mentioned in your framework, the framework which is missing is information, because obviously logistics is provided by the company. Information is a service which needs to be provided by many stakeholders together, including Mastercard and Airtel Payments Bank, information about prices, for example. And that's something, if we can get right, Nikhil, you and I, then I think we have a genuine stab at solving the problem at scale in a business significant way, which is broadly that it should be revenue positive for all stakeholders concerned. Just to give you a sense, we are actually, apart from being India's only hyperlocal fintech, we are also India's few profitable fintechs. We actually broke even last quarter at a revenue run rate, and I don't want to convert this to dollars, but I'm just going to stay at rupees crores, at a revenue run rate of around 1,000 crores. We processed around 20,000 crores of digital payments for the month of October, which means, give or take, we would be a $37 to $38 billion digital payments company in its own right. It seems to be a large number in the context of many countries, but in the context of India, actually that number can easily be 50 times more over the next 2-3 years.
That's phenomenal. And to come back to the entire framework point that we were discussing, and how is it that we can take payments to the last mile. And this is like a fantastic example of kind of embedding oneself in the entire kind of ecosystem. So finest compliments, and we have to try and see how we can kind of deepen this further. But just kind of getting back to this point on obviously the technological evolution in the banking and payment industry, is providing a positive push towards a digitally inclusive society. We've talked about that. And digital payments have, of course, taken a huge leap amidst the pandemic. So I have a slightly different sort of a question, and I'd be actually very interested to hear your views on this. So it's a fact that you guys are managing to get, given your overall ecosystem, and you talked about information. We were talking about the information piece on agri. No one better than Airtel to get the information going. But what my question would be, Anubrata, is that we've got all of these people, as in, let's say, a fairly large set of first-time users, into the digital, inclusion net, if I may call it. Now, what is it that we need to do to ensure that this is not only a first time, and we do something to ensure there is a build-up in their experience and they start to feel a little easier in terms of doing this on a regular basis? Because, banking, financial services, you have that background and I too. The more you have a transacting customer, the more profitable it is for the ecosystem. I'm not talking about organizations. I think I'm talking about profitable for the ecosystem. So what would be your views on that?
Look, firstly, the country's changed quite rapidly. We tend to think of ourselves as a consumer company and not necessarily as a fintech or a bank. And we do a lot of immersions. It's very startling, our recent set of immersions with consumers. What were the outcomes and insights? 3 big insights jumped out, Nikhil. First, even beyond tier 3, tier 4, consumers have started becoming digital. When you go to a local retail store in a tier 4 market, today you will see a digital QR code more often than not. And the retailer has put up that QR code because there is demand, not because he's forced to create supply. This is the big insight. It was very different when we even started the bank's business roughly 3.5 years back. And it's something which tells us that the ecosystem is priming itself rather than various stakeholders necessarily having to prime it for any means or purpose. This is insight 1. Insight 2 is that if you look at how adoption is happening, it's happening through a set of influencers who are coaching and educating slightly older people on how to do digital payments for the first time, given that they are owning a smartphone for the first time. I'll give you a number which is staggering. Roughly 2 years back, in a village, if 100 consumers were consumers of Airtel Payments Bank, 20 of them would be using UPI to make a payment. Today, that number is 40 and growing rapidly. It just tells you that the ecosystem is getting spread through the system of influencers who typically tend to be younger, around 20 to 30, who play the role of local experts, so to say, just out of social goodwill, because they are wanting to help people. Again, this is a change which is happening at scale, which frankly, nobody needs to drive. All we need to drive is really the metric of the percentage of digital payment users to smartphone penetration users, which is 200 to 550, which is actually today less than half in the country. And insight 3, Nikhil, is while we tend to focus on, I would say, tier 3 and beyond for the first time user, incidentally, even in tier 1 and tier 2, there are a large set of users who are not using digital payments because they're worried, as we covered in a few minutes back, because they're worried about safety. That number's dropped a bit because the frauds in the country have dropped a little bit over the last few months. At least that's our anecdotal evidence. Of course, there's no published industry data. But industry-wide approaches and solutions, which I'm seeing RBI, policymakers, companies such as yourself and companies such as ourselves are offering to do better fraud prevention, management, and control, will drive further digital penetration in the urban digitally evolved consumer set in tier 1 and tier 2. So these are the three insights which I think if we build propositions and businesses on, we should really see a growth of 10x in the next 2.5 years on digital payments.
Wow, so 10x over the next 2.5 years. So I think we are definitely in the most exciting industry and possibly the most exciting growth phase that India will see. So maybe, just to, kind of, just towards the end, so of course, we've spoken about what exactly, we need to do for financial inclusion. We've got some sense on agri. Of course, MSME is another sector where you guys are very, very active on the MSME cash management side, trying to get digital to move and get further penetrated into MSMEs. 63 million MSMEs, not even 10% on the GST platform. Huge. According to me, we work with MSMEs and agri together. I think we've got a hands full for the next 15 years, in my view. But just last minute comments from your side, Anubrata, on maybe let's say two things each. This is a difficult question, but I'll still want to get your views on this. Maybe the second question pertains to us, but I would want to know it from you. So two things you think that banks, two things you think that payment networks, and two things you think that the government need to do to ensure that this revolution continues in the country and we achieved our destined objectives.
Sorry, two things. What was the third pillar?
Banks, payment networks, and government.
I think the first part of it is fairly simpler. I mean, India has a demand and supply issue. Yeah. The cost of provision of banking services is not proportional to the income which a bank can generate once it starts moving out of slightly higher income areas. And that's the reason why financial services has not really moved beyond the top 200 to 50 million people in the country. So the one big thing instead of two, I would say, is for banks to evolve cost-effective models to serve for the next 500 million people in financial services. I would say this is paramount. And if you really look at our model, Nikhil, it is squarely that thesis. We are able to deliver banking services at 1/10 the cost of traditional banks, and therefore onboard a large number of users in a meaningfully significant way. For payment networks, I would say we have a slightly more layered and complex problem because payment networks by default are partnership models where you have to work with multiple providers on each end. But I would again leverage on the core insight of security and fraud, which is really hindering people from adopting digital services at scale. I was mentioning the depth and width issue, but I'll paint this in numbers. The average transaction frequency of the 200 million digital paying users is give or take around 5 or 6 a month. Yeah. And that's, I think, if you just put this in context of yourself, Nikhil, as a normal consumer, you will be doing a transaction involving cash at least 5 or 6 times a week. So, this 4x to 5x growth is possible only from the 200 million digital paying users. Payment networks have a very vital role in providing better controls for use by consumers, not at the end, but also in the middle, such as banks. And that's where Mastercard and Airtel Payments Bank is obviously collaborating very deeply to come with a better bouquet of fraud management solutions, better risk management practices, so that we can offer better consumer solutions. The third on the policy side, I think, look, India's, and I'll say this with a lot of passion, India's far ahead of many countries, actually any country in the world, because of two simple facts. The first fact is that India is the only country to have a full-fledged digital identity stack with more than 1 billion people on it. That allows you to deliver many cost-effective payment solutions, which is just not possible anywhere else. And the second is India's one of the only 3 or 4 countries in the world where payment systems are integrated real time, which means that you're able to send money instantly from one bank account to another, which, by the way, is not true for many, many countries, almost most countries across the world. Link these two together, and you've got a very, very innovative payments infrastructure, which someone can really build wonderful, wonderful payment solutions on top of. I would say the one area which possibly requires more integrated thought, not just from policyholders, but also from players such as ourselves, is the integration of value chains into digital services, such as the points we mentioned earlier, which is agriculture, which is fertilizer, which is food procurement, which is dairy. And how do we ensure that farmers at the end and consumers at the top have a genuinely authentic and original method and a reason to use digital payments to begin with? Because today the fact of the matter is the farmer at the end of the chain actually doesn't have a reason to use digital payment services in a compelling way.
So I completely agree with you. And actually, to add two bits to that from my own side in terms of, how is it that one can, I think it's an acceptance thing. The more we build the acceptance side, I think that is where we will be able to, convert, the cash problem that we have at hand. Because fundamentally, you can dole out more cards, whether they are physical or virtual cards. At the end of the day, the card has to be used not at an ATM, I think, is what we are grappling with. So I think that's one point. And I think the second thing, to add to, the points that you made, which are most relevant, I think the other thing is I think we need a concerted, effort to actually proactively resolve for cyber, in my view, because that I think is going to be it could become a bane in course of time, in case we don't look at it at this point. And I think those are the only two areas. And of course, from the government standpoint, I completely agree with you. This great work that's happened, and much more can, kind of evolve as we move along. Thanks so much, Anubrata. This was like an amazing chat. Would have been wonderful to have it in person, but of course the situation, the way it is, I guess next time around we'll do it in person in front of an audience. But thanks so much for your time, and let's get back to getting the country included digitally here.
Thank you, Nikhil, and wonderful moderation, I must say. Great questions. Thanks once again to Mastercard, SFF, and the MAS.
Thanks, Anubrata. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, super interesting conversation, and many thanks to Nikhil and Anubrata for taking time out from their busy schedule to join us today. And definitely, as Nikhil said, in the end, probably we will be back on some super interesting conversations with both Nikhil and Anubrata in front of a physical audience. And with that, we will now move on to our next session. And to join us for our next session, do not forget to refresh your web browser. We will be back with you in a moment. Thank you.